All right, we got a new commit knocked out with this repo having a little bit of a client side minus any auth features. So let's kind of take a quick high level overview of what I've added to the client side before we actually start adding in our auth features. So I've gone ahead and implemented a fetcher service, which is pretty similar to, you know, all the fetcher service API helpers, whatever you want to call it, that I've done in the past. And it's especially critical for this app in particular because this is where we actually set up authentication. This file is where we are going to add our token to every request. So I know with Postman, what we were doing is we were, logging in, copy pasting our token into this little tab here in Postman. And what it actually was doing is if we look over to the adjacent tab under headers, we see that Postman has added an authorization header with a value of bearer, space, and our token, which if you remember, we extracted the token out when we were doing auth manually in the first video, but this is all that this tab in Postman does, is it just gives us a little shortcut to add this authorization header. And what we're going to do is in our, fetcher, fetch helper, API service, whatever you want to call it, we are also going to add in one additional header to our headers object. So we'll get back to that momentarily. But yeah, I didn't add too many fancy features here. I basically just made it say like, hey, if you're a post or a put, go ahead and tell the server it's expecting JSON data and JSON stringify it. And then otherwise, what I've got it doing is just kind of pre-parsing the data. In case the response is good, we give that back. And in the event the server has, a bad response, if we do like a 500 because there was a server issue, or if there was a 400 or 401 or something, because we are, trying to be consistent with our backend for all of our error messages, I was trying to make sure that, we had good error messages set up in place. This is why, because on any server error, we can actually have our fetcher service just automatically make an alert fire. So this saves us an insane amount of work. And let's see, I actually am going to do this here. Now, TypeScript doesn't know what this error, type is. You can throw, confusingly enough, in JavaScript anything. So you can throw an error. That's what, all of our libraries are doing under the hood when something breaks. And, when you throw something, it gets caught. But you can also throw like variables, number, null, objects. So as a result, JavaScript is kind of dumb with its catch construct. This is my biggest gripe, I think, with the language. So as a result, it doesn't know what error can be. And so what we can do to allow it to, understand this, is we can just create a new variable. I'm going to call this one error. And we set it equal to that caught error that we have here. And we just force, cast it to TypeScript. We say like, hey, it's going to be the regular plain old JavaScript error data type. It's not anything else. It's not a string. It's not a number. And so it now knows that error here is of the type error. And therefore, error has, the usual error properties. But for us, it's going to be .message that we're sending up from our server. So just wanted to add that while we were here. But yeah, so we will be revisiting this. I've got a navbar component just because I didn't want to cram all of this in my app.tsx. So just got a div here with a bunch of links to all of our pages. If we go look at our app, just have a few pages here set up, And I've got just a couple placeholders for our login and register page because I haven't done any auth features yet, so we'll be getting to those momentarily. But we have just a little home page. We have a create page where we can create a blurb. All blurbs here is going to show all blurbs. We can click on a button in a blurb to go to its details page. From its details page, we can go to an edit page where we can either, change up the text, or we can also delete it. And then login and register are both going to let us log in and register respectively once we get there. Let's see. We only have one type in our client side types folder, which is just the blurb object. And let's go look at some of those views. Our homepage, just kind of a little quick H1, nothing to really look at here. All blurbs, we just have this fetch get all blurbs and then set it to our blurbs piece of state. We map over it, make some cards with just their text and a link to their details. We don't really have a whole lot of data. This is kind of like the main page of everything. Clicking on that link takes us to the details page, which shows the user ID. It shows the text, and it also shows a little timestamp here. So if the blurb was edited, it's going to say last edited at, and it'll show the edited timestamp. And if it wasn't edited, it's instead going to say created at. So we got a fancy little timestamp feature there. And then here we have a link that takes us to the edit page. Edit page has a lot going on for it, but basically we land on the page, just kind of like with blurb details. We fetch that chirps or that blurb's info, and the only thing I allow to be editable for a blurb is the content. So we just have our content piece of state that we set. So we get the entire blurb object from our server because that's what we're fetching. So we're setting content to that blurb.content here. We got two functions here. Handle update blurb makes a put request to our server to send the updated content. And then handle delete blurb fires off a delete request. Now, I've got a couple little things here as a fancy feature that I really like integrating in my apps. So to talk about what these two navigate events are doing. Nav is coming from the use navigate hook, and this is just an arbitrarily named variable. I could call it pizza if I wanted to, but conventionally you'll probably see it just called nav or navigate. This allows us to programmatically jump to another page. So if I edit my blurb, what this is going to do is if we get a successful response from the server, it's going to jump us back to the details page, which is cool because for your users, how do they know that saving the changes actually went through? Well, if this takes them back to the details page is going to refetch the info. And so your user is going to see that info that they just changed, live. And similarly, for a delete request, how do they know it actually went through successfully? Well, after deleting that blurb, we can't go to the details page because that blurb does not exist anymore. So we just go to all blurbs instead, where we can see every blurb except for the one that we just deleted. So that's just kind of a cool way to confirming to your users that, hey, some kind of change actually went through. And then I don't know if we looked at the create page, but it's basically blurbs details minus, getting the blurb initially. We've got just, a text area, a button. Clicking on that button is going to make a post request to our server. And then if our server sends back the ID for the post request, which it does, if we go look back at our API route, if we successfully create a blurb, we do actually bounce back the ID from the database. So what we do with that is if we do get that back from the server, we go to the details page, which is pretty cool. So like if I have just 10 blurbs in my database, I type out a new one, I hit, the blurb it button, fires off that request. My database makes blurb number 11. my server sends back an object with a message saying like, you successfully did it. And it bounces back an ID property of 11. And so what this does is it navigates to /blurbs/11. So after creating it, we immediately go to its details page and see all of its details. So this kind of follows suit with, like those fancy features that I was talking about, for your users. It just kind of signifies to them that, hey, like the changes they made were actually persistent because something happened. We theoretically could literally just leave the code like this, and it would actually make the post request, but your users would be like, did it actually do anything? And so they might hit the button like 100 times. And since there's no like alert popping up or they're not going to a new page, they'd basically just be creating the exact same, blurb over and over and over again, which we probably want to prevent just to have, we don't want to crap up our database, but that is basically what we have thus far. Now, with our server, I made a decision to make my GET requests public. The post, put, and delete are all protected on our API because they're behind token check. And they must be, because post, put, and delete will allow me to change my database in some kind of way. So I want to make sure that somebody is a logged in user that's registered with my site. If the database is going to be altered in some kind of way. Otherwise, for the GET request, I'm like, yeah, it's basically like the original Twitter where everything was public, so you can get everything. So that was just kind of a deliberate design choice. Like I said, it's kind of an app by app basis. Some projects you might choose to protect your GET requests behind a token check. Some you might not. It just really depends on, how you're feeling for that specific app's data. But I did make those public, and therefore we are actually going to be able to view all blurbs and view a blurb's details. If I attempt to create a blurb, right now we're going to get a bunch of API errors because we're going to fail our token check because I'm not sending a token. We haven't set up any auth code. So without further ado, I've been blabbing on a little bit, just going over a high-level overview of the non-auth specific stuff. Let's go ahead and take a look at the app. It's probably going to look like crap, and there's probably going to be some bugs because I haven't tested anything, but we will find out very soon. That looks terrible. Oh, I forgot. It's a brand new client side, so we still have the overrides. If you want to go back to the classic Bootstrap colors, you can just delete these overrides of all of the ones you don't want. I'm actually going to keep the body background color modification rule in place, but I'm going to change it to like a light gray. There we go. It's a little better. Crap, and I made my nav bar. I made my nav bar color and buttons the same. They're all background info and button info, so they're blending into each other. Let's see. Not gonna screw around with styling too much. We'll just go with that. All right, so here's our homepage. We just have a little greeting, welcome to blurbs. See all blurbs is going to show us all of my really crappy test data. But it is loading up because I do have this public. Click on see my details and we see a little bit more info. Here we are on the second blurb, blurb number 2. Although it says wow blurb number 1. And you know what? Let's go correct that. I'm not doing auth yet. But let me show you the timestamp feature. So right now it says created at because this has not been edited yet. This is what we're actually seeing in the database at the moment. So if I do fix this, anytime you edit, a blurb, because we have that on update current timestamp, anytime you edit a blurb, it will automatically re-update that edited at column. So if I come over here and set that to blurb number 2, and I apply my changes, edited at is no longer going to be null. It's actually going to apply a new timestamp there. So I created it yesterday. However, its edited at time is for today. And so if I refresh this page, since edited at exists, it's going to say last edited at. And this timestamp looks like crap. Let me actually... It's actually not treating that as a date. So gotta fix that. Sorry, I don't need to get into fancy features, but it's being stored in the database's date format, and we need to convert it to the JavaScript date format. So we create a new date, give it the database's format, and then from there it does actually convert it to JavaScript terms, which means we will get the fancy locale string that we're kind of used to. And there we go. So I refreshed the page just by saving my code again, and it now shows last edited at. So just wanted to show that little feature. All right. Now if I try to edit it, or if I try to, oh God, this is terrible. Like I said, I'm not going to worry about styling for this. If I wanted to edit it or delete it, we're going to fail because I'm not sending any auth. It's saying an error occurred, no auth token, please try logging in again. So I can't delete it. And if I try to, let's see, this blurb was empty, was the very first one. If I try to edit it, we're going to get the exact same error. If I try to create one, we're going to get the exact same error. So we're failing token check successfully because I am not logged in. So let's go ahead and create our login and registration page. Now, I need to do my registration page first because, well, I don't have an account to log in with. So we have to have our registration happen first. All right. And then let's see. Gonna make it a center aligned row for my register page. Need to export this out. We're going to put a couple inputs in here. Let's see. We're going to make a column that's 12 out of 12 units wide, so full width on small screens. And on medium screens or greater, it'll be 8 out of 12 units wide, so 2/3 width. We'll do a card with some large drop shadow, some padding, and some top margin. So card, shadow large, padding 3, margin top 5. All right, we're gonna have a label here that says email, and then I'm gonna make an input with the class of form control, which is just Bootstrap's fancy looking input, because the rest of my inputs on create and edit looked like crap, so I'll at least try to make this look nice. I'm gonna make another label for password. And I need a couple pieces of state for, well, email and password here. So const email set email is equal to use state. Const password set password equals use state. And for our inputs, we're going to make those controlled React inputs, meaning the input's value equals our piece of state, and our onChange also updates that piece of state. So we just did that for email. We're going to go ahead and do that for password now. So this input value is equal to password. OnChange is going to grab that event and set password to event.target.value. So for a typical register page, you'd probably have some more info. You'd probably have like a name, maybe like a birth date. You might have some like user settings or preferences. I decided to make this app deliberately simple in that in order to register, you only need an email and password. I'm not saving anything else. So that's actually all we need. And that technically means my register page is going to be the exact same as my login. They're usually going to be pretty similar. If you do your register page first, you can copy paste that to login and just like delete the extra stuff that you don't need. So register, you set up all your state, and then copy paste that to login, delete everything that's not email and password basically. Let's see, in the card here, I'm going to make a little H1 with some center aligned text saying registering. And I'm going to make a button down here that says finish registration. It's going to be styled like a bootstrap button, and it's going to be styled like the success button specifically. I'm going to make a function here, and I'll name it handle registration. And this is going to fire off a post request to /auth/register. And we are going to give it our email and our password as our data. Now, I do want to note here, forgot to note that, but I'm using these short form, URL paths. That's because in our ES-build config, I did set up my server URL variable here to say, hey, when I'm developing on my computer, in my browser, it's running on port 8000, and then my server is running on port 3000. So I do need to make sure that my client-side code is actually hitting my server-side code. In production, they get bundled together, so we actually just leave that off as an empty string, and it figures it out on its own. But I do have this server URL variable that I did utilize here in my fetch requests. So now, upon successfully registering, what do I do upon registration? If you want, when your user registers, you can actually create a token for them and automatically log them in. Totally up to you. You would literally just be adding in like this line of code and changing it to whatever the correct like variable data is. So we can save the results of inserting the new user into the database. And that means that the user's ID here would be results.insertID, but basically everything else would be the same. So if you wanted to, you can just slap in a token with your registration attempt and automatically log them in. Totally up to you. It's kind of a nice convenience feature. Otherwise, you can just like alert and tell them to go to the login page after they've registered, but whatever. Just one of those subjective calls, but I will do that. So now, we are receiving a token with my registration now. So just like with logging in, if I send my credentials, I will get that token back. With Postman, we were just copy pasting it, and that's how, we would store it. I would just have it in my, mouse clipboard and paste it where I, saw fit. How does our React app actually store this? Well, that's where local storage comes into play. So local storage is something that's built into your browser. It's built into every website, every domain. You can store a limited amount of data. I say limited, it's like 5 or 10 megabytes per website, which is an astronomical amount, especially considering that's like hundreds of thousands of times larger than what I'm currently storing. But you can store some data there. If you go on any website and just pop your head into, your console, like heck, we can go look at a Gravity and see what kind of stuff we're storing. I actually don't even know. Let's see. We're storing this little session token for Higgs, so that way Higgs has kind of actually, I don't know. It looks like we're storing 2 timestamps with that. We also are storing some information about like the video player too, so it also looks like that might be involving some timestamps. But yeah, so we're actually not storing a whole lot of stuff. If I go look at YouTube. Oh yeah, by the way, if you ever feel bad about like your console having like errors or warnings in it, it's usually not your code. But I mean, literally just look at like production websites like YouTube. We literally might not be able to like see. There we go. So YouTube is storing just, I don't know, some settings, some config stuff. But yeah, so local storage is just a convenient way of a website being able to save some stuff without like needing a true database. So what we'll do here, and I was working on some previous app on localhost colon 8000, so we actually have some other settings like dark mode, name. But you'll see here, I've got a token stored. You can go look at this, and I'm sure this is like super mega expired. Yeah, that expired July, so I don't know what app that's from, but that is beyond expired. But yeah, so we are going to be saving it in local storage because our client-side JavaScript can programmatically access it, which means it can put it there and also extract it out. So with our data object that's getting sent back, we're going to have like data.message, and we're also going to have data.token there. What we're going to do is we're going to add that to local storage. So how do we add stuff to local storage? Local storage has a function called setItem, which takes 2 arguments. The first is the name of if you want to think of it as like a variable in local storage, or the key, that's what we'll do it as. So typically I just use the lowercase word token. And then the second thing that you're storing is the actual thing you want to store. So our string here. All right. So if we've got it, we'll go ahead and we'll save that token. And then what we're going to do is, I don't know, maybe we can kick our users over to, the create page since they're now, logged in. Why not? So let me go pull in the use navigate hook. And say, okay, well, once I've quote unquote logged in by saving my token, let me just go to /create, which is our page to create a new blurb. All right, and now our registration button here, we're just going to make it go to handle registration. So I'm going to say on click, go to handle registration. And so that saves and stores our token. So let's go get our registration page linked up, and I'm going to register for a new account. So getting it linked up, I need to come over to our browser router, our register page here, switch that out, start typing out register. VS Code is going to be helpful and auto-complete that, and let me auto-import it. All right. So if we come over to register here, we should have a little form. And I'm actually going to delete everything that's currently in local storage. You can tell local storage to delete something, you know, item by item. So I can say like local storage remove item name, dark mode, and token, and delete everything individually. Or I can just run this function local storage.clear, which just wipes it completely. So let me do that because I had old data. Now looking at local storage again, it's completely empty. So and I forget what, you know, max and minimums I set, but I'm going to do 12. And I accidentally did not mean to click the button, but we see, you know, our server responding saying like, hey, passwords required and must be between 10 and 200 characters. Okay. I also did not make my password field have the type of password, which is why we see the letters there. So we can actually come back to our input, and where it has type equals text, change that to type equals password. And we'll change this to type equals email. And this helps for a couple of things. One, visually, it's actually going to put the little dots on our second input here if it's got the type of password. And the second benefit is it makes it more screen reader accessible if this input has the type of email and this has type of password. It allows people who have low visibility or no visibility when they're using a screen reader to be sure of what field they're entering in. So 12 A's and then 12 A's again, but now it's blurred out. If I look at local storage, it's empty. When we click this button, it's going to go ahead, send that data off, register my user, get that token back, store that in local storage, and then kick us over to the create page, all in kind of one fluid fell swoop. So let's do that. And then boom, just kind of happened very smoothly and seamlessly. I know this is super ugly, but you know, we'll deal with it. If we look at local storage again, we see, hey, look at that. We now have our token stored in the browser. If we want, I can go copy this and dump it into our favorite website, jwt.io. Paste it here, and here's my user account. You know, 12 A's and then ID of 4. So there we go. I do have my tokens pretty short-lived just because, you know, on my computer, I want to make sure everything expires properly. So this is going to expire in 10 minutes, which we'll be able to see happen. You know, stuff's going to break. But for now, what if I try to create a blurb or edit or delete one? It's still going to fail because I'm not sending that token with my request. So how do I do it? Well, we were able to store my token in local storage. And by the way, local storage is persistent. I can refresh the page, and it's not like a regular JavaScript variable that disappears. I can even close out of my app and reopen it. Not local, or not Lowe's, localhost. I can shut down the app altogether, reopen it, and then, you know, it's still there. So it's persistent, so it's hanging out there. We were programmatically able to set it here. What about getting it? we can basically do this exact same thing. And what we're going to do is we're going to come back to fetcher, which is one of the first things I said we would, eventually come back to doing. Here is where we are now going to extract our token out. So after we set up our headers and our options objects, the initial empty ones, we're going to try to extract that token out. I'm going to say token is equal to, I'm creating a new variable here. It's going to be equal to local storage.getItem. And then it's going to search for that same key that we put in place. And I, use the lowercase word token here. Gotta be super careful you don't typo that. If you typo this in any way, it's not going to find the right variable. It's actually, for that reason, I know it sounds silly, but I like making a string variable for this. I'm going to call it token key. We're going to set it equal to the string token. And then here, I'm going to, instead of typing it out manually twice, I'm just going to reuse this variable twice. So I'm making sure to export that here. And that way I can come over here and then I can import token key. And there we go. So now I know I'm storing it in the same way I'm trying to access it. Now, what if that data doesn't exist? Like here in local storage, it's an object with a .token property. What about local storage.pizza? We don't have a local storage.pizza. If I do local storage.getItem token, it returns that, but for something that doesn't exist, we're going to get back null. So we need to make sure that the token exists, because what if our user has never registered or logged in before? So it might not be there yet. And so what we can do is just check to see if it exists and say like, all right, well, if the token exists, if it's truthy, then we can do some code here. And so what we're going to do is add in our authorization header. So all the work that Postman was doing for us, if we come back over here, it's changing up the authorization header to have the value bearer space and the actual token. Exactly what we're doing here. The word bearer, a space, and our token. And just like that, we are now programmatically taking our stored token and applying it to every request if that token exists. Which means we can now actually create a blurb. Let's see. Invalid signature. That is a token error I should not be getting. Let me see. See, token time-wise should still be valid. Oh wait, I've got my token set for 2 weeks now. When did I update that? I don't know. Let's see. It was signed with an empty string. Hold on. JWT secret. Signature VB5X DRE. Let me see. Let's go back to our registration code. Token JWT sign. We're using the same, line of code basically between the two requests, between our login and registration. So our configuration variables are the same. So we should have the same exact secret. And I just refreshed the server when I started this video, so that should have the newest value. Invalid signature. Huh. Let's see. Let me go to our middlewares and we're hitting this info block. Why? Oh. Let me temporarily log out the info here. You usually don't want to log this out per se because that's more like user data, like token info. We'll log out like true server-side errors. Let's see, I am perplexed. config.jwt.secret. Let me go look at my passport strategies and make sure it's using the same thing, config.jwt.secret, yeah, from auth header as bearer token. Let's see, my server isn't restarting. Let me go rerun the script manually. Let me log out all of our JWT config stuff. Let's see. Yeah, our secret's pulling up, and that's very sensitive info, so I'm going to remove that immediately from my console logs. Let's see. I'm going to do a little console log of just here, which is something I employ a lot. If I want to see if a specific block of code is actually getting hit, this is what I do. So console log here. Invalid signature. So I'm looking at our request. Our request body has a content property with the value of which is what we have written up here. Our headers, request headers, authorization is the word bearer, space, and then our actual token itself. It's getting signed the same way as our login token. So I'm actually, well, let me go make our login page. I'll log back in as this user and see if maybe my server just was running with the old signature or something. So, like I said, for login, it's basically registration with fewer steps. Your login is pretty much only going to be an email and password. Your registration will have other things, but I'm going to copy paste all of register into login. I'm going to rename the register function to login, which will change it up here and down here. And then we're basically going to just target everything else in that same kind of way. I'm going to rename handle registration to handle login. Our post request is going to be to /auth/login. if we're going to send, same data, and then our server should be responding with, let's see, the exact same data structure, in that it's going to be sending back an object which has a token in it. So getting the same data back from both. And that means we can do this exact same thing. So if we log in, if we get a token back, we'll set it to local storage and kick them over to the create page. And then here, we'll change this text to say logging in for the header. And then we'll make the button just say login. All right, so now that the login page is created, which is super fast, because yet again, it's just almost a carbon copy of register. You can just delete extra stuff from register, like a name, phone number, birth date, some settings, whatever you're setting up for your users. And, just makes it a lot quicker for you. Now that we've got it created, I can come over here. And what I'm going to do is shut everything down fully and restart it. All right. So let me log in as the 12 A's. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And then it did kick me over here, which means we did get a token back. If we go look at local storage, it is a brand new token. Just kind of looking at the signature here and seeing that I've got a different set of bits. Okay, hold on. Okay, weird. So yeah, this is a token for a different app. Okay, I'm an idiot. I don't know what I copy pasted, but it literally was a token for a different app, because the app that, oh, I'm an idiot for not seeing this sooner. So I was getting the invalid signature error because whatever app I was building this pass token with, we can see here that it's different. I have author ID, not ID, but author ID and role here as properties. And so whatever app that I was, setting this up with, it had a different signing key than this app would have, since they're, randomly generated. And so my server's like, dude, I don't know who wrote that token, but it's not me, because this is the password I use to sign tokens, and I can't get that data to match up. So basically, the last 5 minutes of me hunting everything down are because I'm an idiot and pasted in something incorrect or old from Postman. Okay, but yeah. So now that I'm using the right app, I have no idea. Yeah, because that token was, good for like 14 days. And looking back at my settings here, I still have it for 10 minutes. I don't know what in the world I pasted, but so yeah, this was issued, 2 minutes ago. It expires in 8 minutes. Definitely for this app. We're good now. So if we look at, local storage, it's the same thing I just pasted in there, but this is legit. So now I can create something, and it's going to, upon a successful creation, take us over here. What if we want like a little logout button? What if you want to, have your users log out? Well, let's make a little function for that here on our nav bar. Since our nav bar is where we've got all of our like buttons doing things, we're going to have not a link, since we're not going to a page per se, but just a button. However, we are going to make this button look exactly like our links just by giving it the same classes. And this button, when we click on it, instead of, using a link and going to a page, we're going to have it go to that handle logout function. And what we're going to do here is local storage dot remove item. We're actually going to get a third use out of our token key. We can tell local storage to delete our token. And if we're logged out, you know, we probably shouldn't be browsing the app. What we probably should do is force our user back to the login page, which is pretty typical. So let me go grab the use navigate hook. And we'll nav to the login page if somebody logs out. So we'll do that. And yeah, there we go. So we can now click log out. I'm not going to do that yet, just so we can see the expiration happen. But there are a few things to consider. So one thing that we do is if I try to do an action my server would prevent, like in the absence of a token, if I try to create a blurb, or if it's a token from a different app that I accidentally paste in, or if the token's expired, my server will not let me create that token because the server actually protects, everything on the auth side of things. So even if I'm not going to be allowed to actually do that, I still right now can get onto the create a blur page. And that might not be the best user experience there is, because if I'm logged out, if I try to, actually let me do that. I'll log out. So technically I'm logged out. Local storage is empty. Your user might not necessarily know that they're logged out or their token's expired. So they might come here and try to, post something. And it's like, oh, well, you're logged out. Wouldn't it be a little bit better if they just couldn't go to this page at all unless they were logged in? So we can do that. We can actually say like, okay, well, if they're logged out, don't let them go to the create page, or, we can let them see the public stuff. So like, we can see the all blurbs and then like a blurb's details. But like the edit page, we shouldn't allow non-logged in users to see that, even though it'll fail if they attempt to. So we don't actually do anything. It just says like, oh, error, and kicks us back to the blurbs. So what we should do instead is create a way that, safeguards around these pages. And that's kind of what the private wrapper itself does. So we can create like a component called like private wrapper or auth wrapper or component guard or whatever you want to call it, or protected. I'm going to call it auth wrapper since that's kind of a name that makes sense to me. All right. So what we're going to do is auth wrapper is actually going to receive some props. The way it's going to work is for the pages that you want users to be logged in on to access, like create and then edit. You're going to take auth wrapper as your component, and you're going to sandwich the component you want to hide. VS Code is probably going to format that in like the ugliest way possible. So, I hate that. But you are going to be sandwiching your components in the auth wrapper if you want them to be logged in when they're attempting to access that. So we'll do that there. And then for edit blurb, the same thing. Now, TypeScript's getting a little fussy right now because we are actually adding a prop to auth wrapper that it doesn't know about yet. So with React, whenever you have a component sandwiching another component, like this div has what we call React nodes within it. could be other React components, could be just plain old HTML. But each one of these individually is a child element called a React node. And so we're kind of creating our own system for that at the moment. So auth wrapper is going to be expecting a prop called children whose type is actually, what we call a React node. And so what I'm going to do here is create an interface called auth wrapper props. It's getting a prop named children. And this isn't like a prop that we're like setting up, on our own. It's something that React automatically does. It automatically injects that. So like here, I'm not saying like children equals, create. It's not something that you manually do as a prop. It's just something that React automatically creates if you wrap another element. So it's creating that children's prop. We're writing our type here to define it in this way. Auth wrapper is actually receiving props of the type auth wrapper props. And right now, just to kind of like demonstrate it, I'm going to make this div have a border, a red border, with an H1 that says welcome to auth wrapper. And then below that text, what we're going to do is put our props.children right there. So props.children is whatever is getting sandwiched in auth wrapper, so aka our create component. So now if we go to /create, we're going to get this div with this red border and H1 saying welcome to auth wrapper, and then actually the create component. So we're kind of just injecting a component into this component. We'll give that red text as well. Now TypeScript's happy, by the way, because we've properly typed the auth wrapper function to have the correct props. We're actually done with app.tsx now. And so let me go over here. So we see this in action. If I go to all blurbs, it's a public page. So, we don't see anything else but create a blurb. We ordinarily used to see just this. Now we see auth wrapper coming into play. We see this teeny tiny red border and then the text welcome to auth wrapper. So we can see that it's actually sandwiching that. So what are we going to do with this? Well, what we can do is we can do just a very simple check to see if the token exists. So what I can do is say like, okay, well, let me go ahead and say, hey, local storage, can I get my token? We're actually getting a fourth use of that token key, which is great because we were just spelling that manually. If you spelled it, I mean, heck, even if you typo that as token instead of token by, typing it all in lowercase, or if you have it mixed case or uppercase, anything that derives from what is actually the exact match for the string, it wouldn't find it. It would just be null. And so we're just removing that as potential error by saying like, okay, I set up that variable once and we just reuse it over and over. What we can now do is say like, hey, if there isn't a token, auth wrapper here is a component. So no matter what, we have to return JSX. But if we don't have a token, I don't want them going here. So what can we return instead? We can do a little temporary H1 here just as a demonstration. And we'll just say you're not logged in, lol, because I don't have a token, which is pretty cool because like your users now, if they're logged out, are not going to actually see like the input. However, this isn't really like a security feature as much as a quality of life feature for legitimate users. So what if I just do this local storage.set item token a lamau. If I do that, keep hitting the wrong shortcut. If I do that and I type out local storage here, we see that local storage.token does exist. Is this a valid JWT? No. But does it satisfy what auth wrapper is looking for? Yes, we're basically just checking for the existence of a token, not necessarily the validity of it. So there are drawbacks to this. So even if somebody is trying to like force their way onto a page they shouldn't be on, if I'm being a sneaky hacker and trying to use some other, apps token or just putting in garbage stuff like this, if I refresh the page, we will actually see the page, but it doesn't matter ultimately. Why doesn't it matter? Because our server is what is actually evaluating the auth and the validity of the token. We're going to get an error message saying like, malformed JWT, because the string a lamau is not formed in the exact same way a token is. An error occurred, JWT malformed, please try logging in again. So even if I do force myself onto a page I shouldn't necessarily be on, it ultimately doesn't matter. So I've forced myself by creating a spoofed token here. If I try to delete it, come back here, oh, well, look at that. Blurb 3 still exists. So unless I have a legitimate token, can't do anything to the API. So even something like auth wrapper, if I try to spoof my way around it, doesn't matter. But for your legitimate users, if they log out, they go to create a blurb. Here it's like, hey, you're not logged in. So they don't see what they shouldn't see. Now this kind of sucks. If they're not logged in, you maybe want to take more action. So we can actually return a component that will force navigate for us. There is a component named navigate from React Router DOM. We're not using the use navigate hook. We are actually importing a component of theirs. And we can basically make it work like a link. It's kind of like the, React Router DOM link, but as if it gets like auto clicked. So if a token doesn't exist, we're going to tell it to return the navigate component, which directs our user back to login. So if I try to go to create a blurb, if you look at my URL bar here, you're going to see it go to create temporarily, but then flicker back to login. So I do get to the create page initially, which doesn't return anything yet, grabs a token, evaluates this, navigates me back. So I never actually get to it. Same thing goes for the edit page now. If I try to edit it, just kicks me back to the login page. So all right, we've got 12 A's for my email and my password. I click the logout button, so local storage is cleared. Click login. I now have a legitimate token. And as we can see, I am now successfully, going to the create page, and I can actually create blurbs. So now that we're doing that, we can actually get rid of this crap here. We don't need the border or the H1. We can just return our props. So we'll sandwich them in a little fragment here. And yeah. So that actually is all that we need for client-side auth. So auth wrapper here is basically the only need in addition to our fetcher service automatically adding the token to every request if it exists for us. So we've done a lot of code that's kind of like auth related, but the only true auth specific stuff are like these 4 lines of code, and then these like 19 lines of code. If we wanted to get into some advanced features, like what if my token's expired, or I do have a garbage token? I said we could spoof our way onto a page, like if I say local storage dot set item token, if I set my token to Krusty Krab pizza is the pizza, you know, it does let me get onto this page, which I said, you know, was not ideal necessarily, but, you know, it's okay because our server's ultimately going to reject it. What if I, you know, did want to mitigate against this? We can actually have the auth wrapper component check with the server, not just to see if the token exists, but if it's actually a legitimate token. I will need to do one small API adjustment, and we can make a new auth route. I'm just gonna make a GET request in our auth router. So it's gonna be a GET request like /auth/check, or like token check, or whatever you wanna call it. Super simple backend code. It's actually just gonna run through our token check middleware. And with token check, if we fail for any reason, it's going to send a bad status code. However, if we succeed, here I'm sending a good status code. res.json by itself automatically does a 200, but I'll explicitly do it here. And with our fetcher service, it's checking for that. So if it's got a bad status code, it automatically just rejects that. But if we hit that .then block with fetcher, it's because we had a good status code get sent back from the server. So just adding in this one little route here lets us get some really easy checking in place. I do need to do a couple imports here. We do need to use effects, and we do need to use state. So we're still going to do this code, but we also need to add a couple pieces of state. So we'll have is good, or is valid, or token is valid, set token is valid. We're going to have this Boolean piece of state that will start off as false. So we're going to default to not trusting what we receive. We'll run this code, check to see if it exists. If it doesn't exist at all, kick them back to the login page. Otherwise, our use effect here, we'll make a GET request to /auth/token_check, I think is what I named it. If it fails, it's gonna die in here, but if it succeeds, we actually return that data, so therefore we'll be able to hit that .then block. So only if our token is actually good will we hit this. And so if we actually do hit this, we can, well, set token is valid to true. And if we don't hit it, you know, it just remains false. So that works. Now, we're going to use that here for our return and say, okay, if token is valid, or how about let's flip the case. We'll say if not, token is valid. So if it remains false, we're going to do the same thing here. We're just going to say, okay, well, return back to the login page. We're going to say, okay, well, you know, I actually do have a token, but it's not valid. Maybe because it's a fake, maybe because it's expired, maybe because it's not a token at all. Who knows? But regardless, if it's not valid, we go to the login page. And if it is valid, if we make it past that point, we get to see what we actually want to see. So we'll do that. However, this by itself is going to cause an issue. So with how React works, it always has to return something first, no matter what, in its render cycle. And so looking at how it operates is it sets up this piece of state as false. It does all of its setup first before the use effect runs. So something always gets returned once before the use effect fires. So it sets up that state as false, grabs a token, checks it. And let's assume in this instance we do have a legitimate token. Token is valid is still false. This use effect does not run yet because React has to show something in the browser first. And so it runs this if statement. If not token is valid, which right now it has not checked yet. So it's remaining false, which means we do hit this, which means crap. No matter what, even if I do have a legitimate token, we're going to get kicked back to the login page. So we need a way of telling it to say like, hey, hold up, wait. Don't do anything until I actually, have actually finished up. So we'll have a second piece of state here called has checked, which is going to let us know. And this is kind of just like that Boolean piece of state you did in one of your first React labs, has loaded. Kind of the same thing. We want to see if some code has loaded or run yet. And so before we even, check this, what I'm going to say is, okay, well, if not has loaded, if not has checked, return nothing. So we're not going to kick them over to the login page. We're just going to return nothing until set has checked, has fired, and said, okay, everything's good. So what we're going to do is in our use effect, after our dot then, I'll have a dot finally block and set has checked to true. So kind of looking at like the operations of how everything goes. Assuming we have a good token, if we don't have a token at all, here this kind of intercepts it and kicks them back. But assuming we do have a token, both of these pieces of state are set to false. This use effect does not run yet. React has to return something first, so it comes down here. If not has checked is currently false. So when the app initially loads this, we return nothing. Just a blank page with a nav bar effectively while we are actively waiting. And then the use effect fires, checks our token's bad. We don't hit the dot then, but we will hit the finally and say, okay, well, we checked, and guess what? Since we didn't get a good response from our server, we never set it to true. So hash checked is now true. We bypass this. Token is valid is false because I have a crap token, so we get forced back to login. And if we did have a legit token, this would get set to true. We'd bypass this, bypass that, finally get what we need. So this does add a little more complexity to your auth wrapper, but it does actually check the validity of the token now. So right now I've got a garbage token. Let's see. Krusty Krab pizza is the pizza. Clearly not valid. If I refresh, here we see that request firing off to auth token check. And then Oh, you know what? That never fires. Hold on. Both my states are actually shown up as true, which is why we're seeing this, which should not be the case. Then set token is valid. That .then block should not be getting hit. Let me go double check this. For s.ok, that should be failing because I have a crap token. We should be console erroring that and alerting that, which we are. We are sending back a 401 status code, so that should be, yeah. Oh, you know what? Crap, I'm dumb. So this promise is never... Okay. That finally block is not getting hit because I only ever return a resolution to that promise if it goes through successfully. So I actually need to change up my error handling a little bit. So I'm going to grab all of this and return a new promise, which we haven't written in a hot minute. So a promise has a resolve function and a reject function. Previously, the code I wrote here was automatically resolving, but it was never rejecting the promise. And so I'm going to change that from return data to resolve data. In the event it's okay. And in the event we have a server-side error, we will reject with that. And in the event we have a networking error that we catch, we are also going to reject with that. Whoops. So because I wasn't resolving, or because I was just resolving before and wasn't rejecting when it failed, that promise basically acted like it never finished up, so finally was never getting hit properly. Okay. All right. There we go. So now I've got a garbage token because it's not legitimately a token. It's a string Krusty Krab pizza is the pizza. I tried to go to create a blurb. Here we see I'm at /create. We're getting our error message popping up saying error occurred, please try logging in again, and it kicks us back to login. So now, if I'm either, using a bad token, or heck, let me do this. I'm gonna change this to 15 seconds. So it's going to be a super short-lived token. Restarting my server just in case it didn't grab the new value of that. So let me come over here to our login page. Log in. I'm on the create page. Let me say, let me go check out all blurbs first. If we look at local storage now, I do have a token. It is now expired, I believe. let's see, expired at 4/31/31, 4/31/34. So yeah, my token's already expired now. So I am a legitimate user here. I'm not trying to spoof my way to anything. Let's say I want to go create a blurb. Trying to click that button now preemptively checks my token, so I don't spend, like, in theory, what if your user spent like an hour typing out a blurb and you weren't doing this preemptive checking? Be kind of frustrating if they got forced back to the login page because their token was expired and they lost, their blog or their blurb or whatever. But here we're preemptively checking the page, so that's something nifty that we can do. Some additional extra client-side auth features we could do. I'm logged out, so yeah. So I'm logged out because my token expired. So I don't want to see the create a blurb page. And also I'm already logged out, so I shouldn't see logout. And on the inverse, oops. And for the inverse, when I'm logged in, I should show the create a blurb page and I should hide login and register. So let's go make our buttons kind of conditionally work like that. Our navbar can actually take some of this same code. In fact, let's see. We'll just write it from scratch. So for our navbar, we only need one piece of state. And we're not, let me call this piece of state is logged in, because that's really what this reflects more for this component. So we got this is logged in piece of state. And on our handle logout function, you know what? Let's go ahead and do this. Kicking back to the login page, we're also going to set is logged in to false manually here. So this is a Boolean piece of state. How are we going to use it? I'm going to write the code to check the token, just like what we did with auth wrapper in a second. But also, we're going to use that to conditionally evaluate, like, hey, if I'm logged in, should I see this button? So what we're going to do is say, hey, this logout button should only be shown if I am logged in. So we'll do a short circuit here and say if is logged in is truthy, go ahead and show the logout button. We'll do kind of the opposite here. We'll say if we are not logged in, so we'll say not is logged in and return that. So we'll do that for the register and login buttons. Not is logged in and do that. Create page, we should only see that link if we are logged in. So say is logged in and do that. And for the other two, buttons you got here, all blurbs, that's a public page, so I should see that link if I'm logged out or logged in. Same thing with home. I should see that if I'm logged out or logged in. So we got the cool ability to do some of that checking. So here, I'm going to go to our navbar in our component DevTools. And this is the nifty thing about the component DevTools, by the way. You can change state directly from in there. So we're looking at all blurbs, and it's treating me as logged out. This is my is logged in piece of state that we were just writing. So if I'm logged out, we see the home page, we see all blurbs, we see login, register. If that somehow evaluates to true, it changes up the buttons. We still see home and see all blurbs because those are public no matter what. But if I'm logged in, I will then see the create link and the log out link. So let's go write the code to actually check that, because right now it just stays false. So we'll have our use effect here. Go ahead and fire a GET request to /auth /token_check. If we hit our .then block, we'll set is logged in to true. And we actually will write a catch here. We'll say, in case we do have an auth failure, just because our navbar, doesn't refresh from scratch, our navbar stays with every page change. Because it's kind of hovering around, like with React Router DOM, our browser router. Our navbar is always outside of it. We're just kind of conditionally rendering what's inside of it. So since that's the case, there is a chance that this can actually flip over to becoming false at some point in time. So we're going to do this and explicitly say, okay, well, if we have an error failure with the GET request to check the token, set it to false. And now that sets everything up for us. Now, like I said, the navbar is there on every page. So it never really re-renders. And we kind of need a way to force it to re-render on every page change. So what I mean by that is here I'm on the login. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. Do that. I'm logged in. And it navigated me elsewhere to the create page, but my navbar itself is not re-rendering. Just because it's not a brand new page, it's still there. We need a way of kind of forcing it to re-render on every page change. So the use effect has our dependency array, which we haven't really used all that much. The only use cases you've had for it in the past are on like details pages or edit pages. Let's see. Oh. Let's see. Data, set blurb. So I've got my blurb type imported. I initialize it as undefined to start, which is fine because I check for that before showing any content so I don't have any undefined data showing up. Oh, I can just do here is cast that as blurb. There we go. So you've only really used the dependency array in situations like this. You need this use effect to rerun in the event some value changes or some values. In our use effect, the code we're fetching depends on the value of the ID. If my navbar said, /blurb/4, 4 is our ID, we somehow change it to 5, I would need to fetch blurb number 5's data. And that's actually what this dependency array will do for us automatically. It watches that and says, hey, whoa, ID updated behind the scenes. Let me go ahead and rerun this code. And so that's what the dependency list is for. It's for monitoring pieces of state or props in the event that some code within this depends on the value of that updating. So we're going to be using some value, some prop we can get that will change on every page change. And there is something that we haven't used yet from React Router DOM called useLocation. The useLocation hook, which you can save as location. I usually just keep it short, like useNavigate, and just call it loc. It has a property called pathname, which is basically what is in your URL bar. That changes on every page change. And since this is a variable that we have in our dependency array, that changes on every page change, it forces this use effect to rerun on every page change, which is what we want. And so, let's see. Oh, well, hold on. We want it to run on every page except for like the login and registration page. Because if I go to login, it's now going to try to do token check and automatically alert that, which is kind of annoying to your users because like, oh, my token's expired. Please try logging in again. Well, I'm on the freaking login page. I know it's expired. So what we can do is actually kind of like make a rule that ignores this. So like if loc.pathname is equal to /login. So if it's stripping out login out of the URL bar, or if it equals /register, ignore it. Let's see. We can also skip it on public pages. So let me do this. I'm going to make an array here called public pages. Login /register / for our home page, and then /blurbs, since that's the all blurbs page. So we can do something like this and say like, okay, well, if public pages, if that array includes the loc.pathname, the current page that we're on, return. So in the event we want to not run this code for a public page, it now just returns early. So if I'm on the home page, it just stops here. However, if we're on literally any other page that's not these four, it will go ahead and check that for us. So now I'm on home, I refresh, it's not firing token check. If we look at our network tab, we're not going to see token check fire yet. And I'll log in, and here we see all of our navbar stuff. My token's going to be expired in just a few seconds. Give it a few more. All right, it's probably expired by now. So all blurbs, it's a public page. I should not have my navbar recheck. But if I try to go back to create a blurb now, it's going to automatically force that navbar to re-render. So cool. And it might look like there is an alarming amount of errors in the console. We are console erroring these. So instead of doing console.log, I put in our fetch helper console.error, which is just a red console log with a little more info in it. So this is actually something we are expecting to see for the workflow we were going through. And this is just a warning from the React dev tools. So code-wise, we're actually all clear because this is something we expect from the app, and this is not anything to do with our app itself. All right, but yeah, that's client-side auth with some extra fancy features, including actually checking for the validity of the token and forcing the navbar to re-render. So yeah, let me know if you have any questions.